Alright guys, we're back again with another Cogito reaction, and in this one we're going to be looking at the religion of Daoism or Taoism. It depends on, there's two ways I guess of saying it, and in this video I think they explain why.
Okay.
So let's take a look.
Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. These wise phrases, which you've no doubt heard before, are over 2,000 years old. They come from Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, what many people consider to be the founding document of Taoism. This organized religious tradition is known for its care for nature, peace, and going with the flow. But what exactly is Taoism? What do yin and yang and qi mean? And what does it all have to do with Obi-Wan Kenobi? Well, let's find out. First of all, is it Daoism or Taoism? Well, Chinese is a complicated language to translate into English. So the reason there is two Daoisms is because of two different systems attempting to write Chinese in the Latin alphabet. The Wade-Giles system, which spells Dao with a T, was popular during the 19th and 20th centuries. But the Chinese never really liked the system, and so developed Hanyu Pinyin, the system that gave us the D in the 1950s. This is why Tao is now Dao, but many American publications still use the old Wade-Giles system, so you'll still see Tao and Taoism around. Either way, with a T or with a D, it's pronounced Dao. Daoism is an indigenous Chinese religion, but it isn't the religion of China. China has three major religious traditions: Daoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. Most Chinese people practice all three. Apart from priests, Chinese people rarely identify with only one religion. Daoism first appears during an incredible time in Chinese history, the Warring States period, a period where states warred from the 5th to 3rd centuries BCE. During this period, multiple philosophers such as Confucius put forward ideas on how to control people, armies, and states. But one philosopher stood on the sidelines and laughed at the idea that humans could even begin to know the correct way to do things when our minds and perspectives were so small. This was wise old grey-bearded Lao Tzu, or the Old Master. His book, the Tao Te Ching, and Chuang-Tzu's book, the Chuang-Tzu, spoke of a universal force known as the Tao. So what exactly is the Tao? Tao. Something unformed and complete, before heaven and earth were born, solitary and silent, stands alone and unchanging, pervading all things without limit. It is like the mother of all things under heaven. But I don't know its name. Better call it Tao. Better call it great. Tao Te Ching, chapter 25. I guess you assume that Daoism has something to do with the Tao.
Have you ever met somebody that talks about tapping into the force like that? Let's just call it the force for now. We mean Tao.
Yeah.
But I know somebody specifically that's coming to mind that has different methodologies for tapping into something that they say they can barely talk about. Yeah. And it makes me think a little bit about books like Flow. Like there's writings about something like flow state, like where you are fully engaged in something and time seems to warp, like it goes by super fast. You're not conscious the way you normally are. Sleep, it makes me think a little bit about like sleeping and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on it?
I'm just thinking about like energy and some unseen force that kind of like makes everything, work. Like maybe in the material realm, I'm thinking materialistically, like there's this unseen thing that we can't see with our human eyes, but that like maybe connects everything together, maybe.
Right. It's interesting because then you're getting into kind of like quantum physics, right? And some of the observations are pretty crazy there. It's like you go lower and lower and they discovered tinier yet molecules, but there's like something even lower, and then it's reflected in the macro too when they look at space and they're like, well, what's dark matter? What is this stuff out there? Infinite. What if it's infinitely tiny and infinitely grand, and what if there's nothing at the I'm enlightened. No, but like, maybe if the underpinning energy that's beneath everything is a nothing that even calling it nothing, it would make it to something of something.
Yeah.
It's like, don't even call it nothing because it's nothing is something actually. This is so nothing. It's
Well, hopefully this is going to give us some more details on that because, yeah.
And it does. But Tao isn't a god, and Taoists don't worship the Tao. Tao simply means the way. The word for avenue in Chinese is Dadao, wide way, for example. But in Taoism, the word is a tad more mystical. The first line of the Tao Te Ching makes it clear that the Tao cannot be fully understood. The Tao that can be told of is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. For Lao Tzu, it's impossible to explain the Tao in words, and only a complete and utter idiot would think they could explain it. Let me explain. The Tao is the flow of the universe. It is the source of reality. It's infinite, yet empty, yet complete, and it creates and directs the endlessly diverse universe. Or, in the words of Obi-Wan Kenobi, it surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together. But the Tao was never created. It exists by and of itself. The universe was born from the Tao, but the Tao has no interest in it. It doesn't create for a reason, it simply creates and constantly transforms. Any idea that the universe cares about humans only comes from our own human-centeredness. But even though the Tao is unknowable, it has an order which can be recognized in nature. This kind of order is called Li, a word which meant the markings in jade or the grain in wood. Li kind of means organic order, the random yet perfect patterns of flowing water, the shapes of trees and clouds and snowflakes. It is by observing Li that we can see the workings of the Tao. Lao Tzu and Chuang-Tzu point out that because the Tao lies at the root of all existence, the universe takes care of itself perfectly well, of its own accord. Sun goes up, sun goes down. Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. The rhythm of life which rises from the earth, grows, matures, decays, and eventually returns to the earth, it all happens without force, or orders, or effort. Change is the only constant, but this change is regular, recognizable, and fundamentally good. That is Tao, or at least how I understand it. Lao Tzu and Chuang-Tzu make it very clear that the Tao cannot be expressed in words, and this is an important part of Taoism. Language is limited and based on our human perspectives, which are narrow. Language puts ideas in boxes, but you can't put the Tao in a box in the same way you can't put a river in a bucket. The aim of Taoism then is to help people feel the Tao, to see it in nature, and to be able to move in harmony with it. And one way to do this is through Wu Wei. Wu Wei. In its most basic sense, Wu Wei means not doing or not acting. Lao Tzu confusingly talks about Wei Wu Wei, about doing the non-doing, which means that doing nothing requires the doer to do something.
okay. An idea often talked about, and it's interesting because like you take somebody who commands a lot of attention like Osho, and then when asked about it, he'd be like, I'm a very typical man. So damn typical, in fact. Like, or not typical, what's the word you use? Like,
I don't know.
Like basic, simple man, you know what I mean? And then I know verses from listening to Alan Watts talk about Zazen and Zen and different things like that. I've heard stories of a way of being, like the Wu Wei probably, of going with the flow. And they talk about a very sort of simple person that engages fully with the situations that are before them. Without, like, you know, but it's interesting when somebody like Osho comes along and is like, I'm like the simplest person ever. And people are aping them, trying to be like them, trying to emulate them, trying to get a sense of all this.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the only people, this is going to be a controversial thing, but sometimes it's like the only people who aren't enlightened are like spiritual people trying to be enlightened. It's like, what if everything else is going with the flow?
Yeah.
And that is the enlightenment to have, and we're just insane. You know what I mean? Like, not really, but I'm saying that there's an idea, because there's a parable about a guy that gets into a river, and the onlooker thought he was dead. Until he got, you know, he went down like these rapids through the river and then came out the other side and got off and like brushed his water off and went off. And he was like, I thought you were dead. He's like, that's the only way to go through the river is let it, you know, if I resisted it, if I fought it, I would have hit all the rocks and been damaged.
Yeah.
And that this ties into Wu Wei in some way of going with the flow with no resistance.
Yeah.
it's almost like, this is the last thing I'll say about it. Spirituality can be, if it gets too belief oriented, become resistance to what is.
Yeah. No, I think you're making a good point.
One interpretation is that to weigh is to act on social or personal expectations, to do things because you think that's what you're supposed to do, to act within a rigid mindset. Since the universe is always changing, if you try to navigate it with an unchanging mindset, you're gonna have a bad time. Wu Wei is to act, but acting without intent. So rather than not doing, it kind of means not forcing, not swimming against the stream of the Tao. So Wu Wei isn't doing nothing. Think of Japanese judo, where an opponent is defeated not by brute strength, but by using the movement of their own force against them. One of the recurring metaphors for the Tao in the Tao Te Ching is pu, or uncarved wood. This uncarved wood captures what is so difficult to describe about the Tao. Its simplicity and naturalness, its lack of specific features, and its creative potential. Uncarved wood can be anything, but it can only be anything because it hasn't been carved up. Taoists say that humans have been carved up by language, forced morality, and selfishness. They've been processed from a humble, raw material with infinite potential into a product sculpted by their environment. So the only way to move with the Tao is to get yourself out of rigid, inflexible perspectives. To stop thinking of yourself as separate from nature and its processes. From thinking that you stand outside the stream and can dictate which way it will flow. You're in the stream. You can either row against it or sail along it. Texts. The Tao Te Ching and Chong.
I'd just like to stop there. It's kind of non-dual even. It's like you're part of it. Just be like a flow with it. And I think one of the big hindrances towards that is I would see as trying to control. And this is like seems to be a big theme that we come back to is our need to control and the suffering that it causes by.
But we're made out of that.
Yeah.
You know, I keep harping about this. Is that like it's almost like how can you successfully become non-dual or whatever without first becoming rigidly ideologically possessed? You know what I mean? Because have you ever seen a human that has no human contact, like hasn't been, tainted by human influence?
Yeah.
They're like, they would scare you, they're carnal. But maybe at the highest levels of wisdom, you realize that like everything you think is so gentrified and sophisticated is actually, you'd be better off being like an animal. You know what I mean? Who knows? Maybe that's the thing. But we are this way for a reason. It's like from the moment you're little, it's like, don't do that. Don't play with that. Don't go over there. You're going to burn yourself. You're going to this. That makes up who we are.
Yeah.
And then you get to a point where you're like, I'm anxious all the time and rigid and have a hard time enjoying anything from like an authentic place.
Yeah. Now try to let it all go.
Let it all go. But I do think you should experiment with letting it go. I think there's a lot of experimentation that can be freeing where you are like, I'm just going to act like a creature. How would I behave if I was not restrained by anything? Yeah. You know what I mean? Hold myself whatever way I want to hold myself. And my proof that there's something to that is I find the most rigid people I can find and suggest something like that. And they're like, no. Like they're like horrified at, you don't just express your emotions. What are you talking about? I'm like, yeah, it's unsettling when somebody's overbearing or animated right in your face. But if you're a sensible human, wait till you're by yourself and be expressive and see what the most natural thing would be. I've kind of gone way off on a tangent here.
Books are considered by many non-Taoists to be the two most important books in Taoism. The Tao Te Ching is a series of short, poetic statements about the Wei, Tao, and its power, the. It's very short. You can read this book in an afternoon, but it'll be a fairly confusing afternoon. Some of its sayings, such as the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, are fairly easy to understand. Others, like good knots have no rope but cannot be untied, and govern big countries like you cook a little fish, are a bit trickier. The Tao Te Ching, like many texts at the time, was written to teach a ruler. But Lao Tzu's advice was pretty radical. He said that the best way to rule was to not rule, like Wu Wei, to let the world live according to its natural pattern, and that would bring about harmony and peace. The Tao Te Ching can be interpreted many different ways, which is why it's been translated into English more times than any other book except the Bible. And it's fully made its way into pop culture. You can now learn about the Tao of Meow, the Tao of dating, the Tao of network security monitoring, the Tao of horses, the Tao of banjo, and even the Tao of Bill Murray. Next to Lao Tzu, no other Taoist commands more attention than Chuang Tzu. Whereas the Tao Te Ching was written to teach rulers, Chuang Tzu is aimed more at ordinary people. In the Chuang Tzu, the wise person is someone completely untroubled with regular concerns like politics and money. They simply skip over life's obstacles without worries. Chuang Tzu constantly lets us know that our perceptions are unreliable. How we see life and death and good and bad and beautiful and ugly depend on
And insane to you, and insane to anybody who's a normal, effective person in life. Sorry, time and time again, it seems to be like hinted at that, like, they're not concerned with politics. They're not concerned with all these things. To you, that's crazy. Unless you're already a bit kooky, you know what I mean, or a secret genius. If you're a normal person, you do care about wearing clothes that everybody, respects.
Well, it'd be hard to engage with natural reality without caring.
Well, that's what I'm saying, though. But that's what they're hinting at is what you're missing out on.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? It comes down to the same decision that's always been there. You're going to give it up? You're going to be like the rich man Jesus was talking to and, like, go away sad? Or are you going to actually be able to give it up?
Yeah.
And, I mean, I can't claim that I've done that. You know, I think we all do in doses in some ways. Yeah. The person that's like, I'm going to break free from this thing is doing that in a way.
But we've also heard stories of, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way also. So there's conflicting on whether the complete aesthetic, give up everything and potato sack it method is the way to go, or is there the middle path, or do you have to get super turbo rich first?
Which video was it where I was talking about Satan and that he could foil God's plan if only he would be like, I'm not going to be Satan, and you're right, God, I actually give up. I'm not going to fight you anymore. God would be like, no! It keeps the universe in balance.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder if all these Zen masters, they talk about not having concern with the same things other people are concerned with. But what would really be the outcome if everybody was enlightened all of a sudden? Would we just meditate into an early grave?
Yeah.
Be like, who got the food? Oh! Melt. Like, doesn't the world kind of depend on unconsciousness?
Yeah.
But at the same time, some of the wise people we've talked to, one of them at least on this thing was like, and I agreed with them, was like, we are in danger with too much ego. You're in danger of self-destruction.
Yes.
Like, because that's the nature essentially of the ego, is to be so self-preserving that it actually wants to destroy itself. So, but at the same time, I like air conditioning. I like having power. I like the internet.
Yeah.
If everybody got enlightened, would we have those things? Or, became Wu Wei. I don't know.
Good points.
On our life experiences and what we or our culture value. But these are artificial constructs. They hurt spontaneity and happiness. Chuang Tzu compares life to when a drunken man falls out of a carriage. He has no idea what's going on. He doesn't even know he's fallen, and so unaware and relaxed, he bounces off the ground, brushes himself off, and is completely unharmed. Whereas a sober person who stiffens up upon falling would have broken several bones. Yeah. Because the Tao Te Ching and Chuang Tzu are easily the best known Taoist texts outside of China, people imagine that they are also the most important Taoist texts. But they're not. There are thousands of Taoist texts. They're just mostly unknown. When was the last time you heard of the Code of New King for Controlling Demons, which lists 36,000 demons that can be warded off by knowing their names? Or Poems Made While Beating the Ground, which includes a series of 135 poems, each of which begins and ends with the line, Yao Fu does not write poems merely for fun. Or my favourite Taoist text, because it's apparently named after the YouTube comment section, The Forest of Opinions by Ma Yun. Taoists don't only read the Tao Te Ching and Chuang Tzu. They function as ingredients, not gospel, in the complicated stew of Taoism. All the recognized Taoist scriptures are assembled in a massive collection called the Taoist Canon, which contains about 1,500 texts. There is so much information in these texts that To Yu discovered a cure for malaria in a Taoist text called Emergency Prescriptions Kept Up One's Sleeve, and won a Nobel Prize for it. Yin and Yang. The Taoists see an order in the world. Things grow from the earth, they mature, they age, they die, and then they return to the earth in a recognizable pattern. The name for this pattern is yin and yang. To understand the meaning of yin and yang in Taoism, let's look at its original meaning, which was the shady and sunny sides of a hill. The shady and sunny sides of hills are always changing. The side that is in the sun in the morning will be in the shade in the afternoon, and vice versa. And this goes to show how nothing in the world ever stays the same. And that cycle goes on forever. The shady side isn't better than the sunny side. Neither is preferable, and neither can really exist without the other. Something can only be yin until it reaches peak yin, and then it will transition into yang, and that will go back and forth. So there can be no growth without decline, no joy without sadness, and no life without death. Qi. Much like yin and yang, the word qi has made its way into pop culture. What is qi? Well, in modern Chinese, the word means air. The Chinese term for balloon is qi ball, for example. But just like the Tao, in Taoist thought, qi is more complicated than its original meaning. Qi refers to the stuff or energy that makes up and connects the universe. Solids, liquids, gases, they're all composed of qi. But so are less material things like energy, thoughts, and willpower. Qi flows through your body. When the qi is flowing, you stay alive. When the qi stops, you're dead. Everyone gets a certain amount of qi at birth and uses it throughout life. By cultivating good qi through breathing exercises, diet, and meditation, you can live longer and better connect with the Tao. Taoists see the heavens, the earth, and the body as reflections of each other, so a stimulus in one area will ripple into all the other areas. We're all interrelated parts of one organic network, and qi connects this network. It's like the internet, but for all of reality. So Taoist belief has just as much to do with ritual and faith as it does with physical exercise, forms of meditation, and diet. This is why breathing and physical exercises have become kind of the face of Taoism. Tai Chi is probably the main thing non-Chinese people associate with Taoism. So let's have a look at it. Its full name.
I was just thinking with the Qi thing, I think it's cool. It's, it's fun to think about, this unseen force that kind of you have. But if you just took the Qi out of there and just had healthy living and did all the stuff that is said, you'd still probably, your likelihood of living a long life would be good. You don't necessarily, I think, have to believe in Qi in order for it to matter even. But, the healthy living and all the stuff, good stuff.
Name is Tai Chi Chuan, and I know I said that wrong. It means the boxing of the great ultimate. It's an inner boxing, one that focuses on the internal circulation of qi rather than brute strength. The philosophy of Tai Chi is not to resist an incoming force, but to meet it with softness until the incoming force exhausts itself or can be safely redirected. Non-combat Tai Chi, the one you see elderly people doing at parks, is a slowed down version. It stimulates blood circulation, relaxation, and helps qi flow more freely through the body. Tai Chi is considered a great exercise for those with low mobility. Gods and goddesses. While Lao Tzu is usually credited as the founder of Taoism, the person who most deserves the title is Chang Daoling. In 142 CE, he received a revelation from the most elevated Lord Lao, the god version of Lao Tzu. Lord Lao revealed to Chang that the heavens were organized in a celestial bureaucracy. Like it says in the Tao Te Ching, the earth is a reflection of the heavens. So if there is a bureaucracy on earth, it's because there was already one in heaven. Chang and his followers were given special access to a network of celestial bureaucrats who control the fates of people in this world and the next. So, for example, if you had a family member that you were afraid might not get into heaven, you could contact your local Taoist priest, they would do a ritual, and you could kind of state your case to the relevant celestial bureaucrat. The group Chang founded was called the Way of the Celestial Masters, and Chang served as the first celestial master. While Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi wrote centuries before this group appeared, this was the first time a group of organized people had got together and consciously did Taoism. Many of the features you...
It almost feels like Daoism was like a very practical, science-based thing in the beginning and then almost got hijacked by people and turned it into a religion, adding gods and mystical thinking to it. Not to say that, I'm not saying that's a bad, I'm just saying it appears like it was it was taken like, oh, here's this system that clearly works. Now let's put a bunch of magical thinking belief systems behind it and create a system now that we can kind of like control.
Well, you know how like science, if you really think about it, becomes scientism.
Yeah.
Like it can, even science, which is like the best thing we've got so far, can become scientism and belief based. But we were like, me and my wife were like reading some Socrates. And I think the important thing to remember back then is that even spiritual things were kind of like the science of the day. Like Socrates was like talking about the gods as if they were real. Like, well, everybody knows that the gods are never wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like as if that was the science of the time.
Yeah.
So I think a bit of that goes on too when they're developing newer ideas. They're building off of established ideas, right?
And it's almost like it's needed to fill in gaps in order to make the conversation even happen.
Right.
It's like,
yes.
it's like, we don't have terms for this, so we'll call it gods, and we'll make, just so we can make it function.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
And then, eventually somebody like Jordan Peterson comes along breaks it apart, tells you about the archetypal nature of it and how these things are tropes that have existed for so long and they help point to something and where it ties to psychology.
Yeah.
Right?
You associate with organized religion like gods, priests, sacred texts, and rituals show up first in Daoism with the Way of the Celestial Masters. Now, the Way of the Celestial Masters didn't last, but their ideas influenced all future Daoist groups. Many people believe Daoism is a religion without gods. That isn't true. While the Tao Te Ching does not mention gods, Daoism is full of them. Chinese religion in general has always included many gods, local deities, spirits, ghosts, and other beings. Local deities fill particular purposes like helping with rain and agriculture, and they would occupy specific places in the world. Rural villages would often have their own gods, and families might even honor the kitchen gods in their homes. Most deities were once people who earned god status, so ordinary humans can ascend to godhood or immortality, like Lao Tzu, who is now Lord Lao, and is seen as almost an incarnation of the Tao itself. So which of these deities are the most important in Taoist life? Well, the top gods are probably the three pure ones, one of which is the deified Lao Tzu, the Jade Emperor, and there's also the Eight Immortals. You may be imagining that they get the most attention, but actually, no. Think of it like this. Whenever you need something from the government, like getting a driver's license, you don't call the Prime Minister. Instead, you call the relevant government department for your particular problem. The celestial government works the same way. If you're having a problem with demons, you're going to want to do an offer to this guy. If you're having marriage problems, you'll be looking for this fella to help out. And if you want help in an exam, then this nerd would be your best bet. So those are the basics of Daoism. You might still be confused, and you should be. This is a very complicated religion and is inherently difficult to understand. Remember, the Tao that can be told of is not the eternal Tao.
Wow, a lot there. I was surprised that it ended up like leading into like polytheism. I'm shocked. I didn't know it was going to go there. I thought like what you saw at the beginning was going to be like the gist of it, and then all these gods got in there, and it reminded me of Hinduism by the end, with all the gods focusing on certain elements that make everything function in order, and you pray to them and stuff like that.
It's just funny the way things are designed and how they function when everybody does them and how they function on an individual level.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. The system, the synchronicity, and how you see these trends in like cultures and how they evolve and where we've gotten to today. It's pretty fascinating. And hey, Cogito, another great Cogito video. So shout out to them. Go check out their channel. Hopefully, guys, if you liked our video, our reaction here, you hit that like, subscribe, share this with a friend, and everybody. Until next time,
stay spiritual.